We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You know, it was kind of like a hazy, not a hazy day. It was just like a normal day, little clouds here and there. And we were at the station at the time, and that's when the verdict had come in. And it was funny. I remember one of the medics at the ambulance at the station, because I was the captain and I was also a field training officer. And I just remember one of the guys throwing a carrot at the TV. Kid you not, when the verdicts came in. And, you know, whatever, it is what it was at the time. And, you know, I knew that Los Angeles was on a thing called TAC alert, which means that at the time we had the little printout machines. There was no cell phones. There was no, it was like those the teletype machines. That's what it was. So everybody got the teletypes. And, you know, everybody was on TAC alert, just be careful. And so we were then sent to go somewhere, I forget where it was, but we had gone to a call, and I think we had finished the call, and my partner and I were driving south on the 110 freeway, coming up to the 105 freeway. And to the right, I was driving, and I see these plumes of smoke just popping up. And I looked at my partner. I thought, oh, just, you know, maybe a house fire or something like that. Because in Los Angeles, you know, we got about, I mean, we're like 65 miles by 30 miles. I mean, there's constantly stuff happening. You know, if it's not emergency stuff, it's, you know, from parties to whatever it is, it's LA, right? Mm-hmm. And so we see these plumes of smoke in the distance, and it just looks like one. Okay, then another one, and another one. At that point, we called our dispatch on the mic, and to find out what's going on. I don't believe we had a radio in the ambulance at that time, but that's all we had. If we did, it would have been like AM or FM. Mm-hmm. And they said, yeah, there's some activity, police activity going on in the area. We need you to get back to your station right now. I had no clue. Mm-hmm. We get back to the station, and we were essentially, I would say we were probably maybe 2 miles from Florence and Normandy on the freeway. Mm-hmm. And so we saw where the epicenter was, where it all started. We ended up going back to the station, and we get to the station, we turn on the news, and that's where we see a lot of the stuff that was happening, especially over there. They had the helicopters. They were showing you know, the liquor store in the corner getting torched. Mm-hmm. We saw the Reginald Denning incident in the street. That was all televised. You know, in Los Angeles, it was, when you come from a place like Hollywood, everything is kind of like a show and tell. And if it's not the O.J. Simpson chase, it was helicopters overseeing incidences that, like with Reginald Denning or the North Hollywood bank robbery. Mm-hmm. You know, actual stuff, actual like movies in a sense, over top watching. You know, a lot of times we'll even see here where we got pursuits on TV. As I was telling you before, we have our news channels that primarily run from about 5 to about midnight, and there's maybe about 3 channels. Mm-hmm. And outside of the nightly news that they all break for, except for a few, you may get a pursuit or 2 pursuits every night. And that is aired on about 3 channels. And each news network has their own stringer up in the air. A stringer is somebody who's stringer is usually somebody that's on the ground. If it's like in sports or out, for us, it's, you know, on the ground with the camera crew, following pursuits and what have you. Mm-hmm. So it's something that is kind of a normal thing in Los Angeles, especially with pursuits, because you will see a pursuit. Sometimes if it is in the neighborhood, folks will come outside and sit mm-hmm. there and watch the pursuits. I've chased them and taken pictures before. Uh-huh. So to backtrack, we're now at the station. Nature's lights are starting to go down, and it's starting to get dark, and we're seeing more and more fire spots everywhere. Mm-hmm. You know, I was working on an ambulance. I used to be like an Explorer Reserve with LA City Fire prior to that. Now here I am, at the ambulance in my station. And when the sun was going down, at that point, I think we got a call to go, I'm not sure where, or they told us to leave the station and just kind of like put us out, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And we started driving. And as we're driving, we're going through, because we're coming from Santa Monica, and we're going down Santa Monica Boulevard, and we're coming up to Westwood. Westwood years ago had riots that was called the New Jack City riots.
Okay.
It was from the movie New Jack City. Folks couldn't get in. And a little mini riot blew out in Westwood. So as we're driving to Westwood was like one of the first places we saw that LAPD would not let you into these areas. And also Westwood is home to UCLA. So you have a lot of kids there and students. And we keep driving. At that point, I just turn on the red lights. I guess you guys got blue lights. We do the red lights out here.
Yeah.
Which is funny to me.
Yeah.
So we have the little red lights going and no siren. Maybe I'll hit it, when I come to an intersection. And at that point, I'm moving from right lane to middle lane. No cars were in the street at that point. And so I made that decision that I'm not going to be just on the right side of the street like you normally are. I just moved the rig right into the center of the street, and I took control of the whole street and just kept driving. And that's how I pretty much drove all the way into the thing. And so we get into Beverly Hills. Shocker, more cops over there, and nobody could get through into that area. Kept driving, get to a street called La Cienega. I make a right, and I'm with my partner. And as we're driving south down La Cienega, we start seeing fires. And to the right of us, to the left of us, just buildings on fire. It was pretty intense. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Not a soul in the neighborhood. No one was out. No cars were out. Just the rig, the red lights, and just plumes of fire, plumes of smoke, and just fire everywhere. Farther we go down, now more buildings on fire just next to us. Very apocalyptic. When you see that kind of stuff, there is this like weird beauty to it. Even in tragedy, there is a weird beauty to tragedy. I remember seeing we had fires in Malibu years ago, and we were sent up to Malibu, and there was these hills, and on top of the hills were these two Huey helicopters, and in the background you see just this red, and again, beauty in tragedy, because it kind of reminds you of that, more of that apocalyptic now type imagery. And what's going on, it's people's worst days, but again, there's something about that visually you were just like captured. Again, could be something because I'm from LA, and we look at the films, and that's what we all did growing up. So so we're going down. I see now gas stations completely engulfed. I see liquor stores completely engulfed. Still nobody down. And at that point, and I wrote in my friend Annie Nightingale, who is a host on BBC Radio. She recently passed away, but she was a host for over 50 years and one of the longest hosts on radio. And she happened to be in LA, and she asked me to write in her autobiography about my experiences. And one of the things that I had mentioned was, when we're driving and we just see fires, we know there's now riots going on. We were also afraid of getting shot ourselves. And I remember my partner and I just kind of like leaning back in our chairs and just kind of scooping down and going kind of creeping, because we did hear later on that certain fire engines were taking shots. And there was a captain that was shot in the face. He survived, thankfully, but it happens, and the intention may not be necessarily towards, there is an anger obviously towards law enforcement, but to have that happen to first responders in the sense of EMS, it was really something we never really grasp at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's pretty much my end of my recollection visually of seeing, of going down into the fires itself during the riots. At some point, I just don't remember anything else.
Yeah.
It's just like it's
yeah.
gone. I remember going in,
Mm-hmm.
and then that was it, and I just don't remember anything else.
Yeah, our brains, I think, just compartmentalize.
Right.
And like, and we'll get into it, but it's like that idea of, for right now, we're gonna store these memories, and then maybe they come back years later, or they come back when footage of other riots, or even smells. I'm sure you smell gunpowder. You smell embers, burning or whatever, and it's like, okay, I remember those. Yeah.
Funny you say that, Brian, because when we just recently had the fires out here in Los Angeles, I went up to Altadena.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 30 years since I did all that, and I still get that itch, man. I still get that fire bug. I still get that I got to go and help somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't leave you, and it's almost like a weird obsession of wanting to help, and when you can't help, you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so what do? The closest thing I'm able to do is grab my camera, because I shoot photography on the side, but I also shoot incidences of fires and police activity is kind of like a stringer, but I do it for my own benefit, and I kind of put an artistic approach, or look to the photos itself, so they're not a typical fire photo you'd see in some some rag or whatever, police or fire website or whatever. Now I guess their websites, there's no more rags, but
yeah.
When I did go to Altadena and I started taking pictures up in the fires up in Altadena up here, I got in my car and I got out of the car, and a photographer came up to me, because there's only photographers, and there's about 3 or 4 that were just walking the streets. Mm-hmm. And mind you, there was no houses at this point. And this was within the first 12 hours of the fire at nighttime, because most of the fire happened at nighttime. And to understand that, especially in fire, people are like, oh, why wasn't anybody there? The hydrants and this and that. No, it doesn't work that way. I quickly kind of put the idea that if you have let's say you have like a lighter, and you put a can of hairspray to it,
yeah,
and that propellant just pops out like that, the speed of the propellant, the intensity of the propellant is what happened, and to see the amount of damage was beyond comprehension. And so I'm out there and I'm taking pictures of the fire, and the sun's going down at this point. It was around 5 o'clock, but there was such a dark haze of smoke, and the sun, everything just seemed off and weird in the neighborhood. And it got really dark, and I saw the 3 other photographers all wandering around. You'd see like a fire truck pull up, hose a house, and then take off. In an odd sense, I know this sounds weird, but it was very zombie-like. Everybody's behavior, just like putting out the house fire and then leaving to go down the street, putting out the house fire, and then there's other photographers just kind of like taking pictures, and it was just an eerie scene. And it got really dark, and as I was still walking, I was walking up the street. I just have my yellow brush jacket on, and I see these power lines just like hanging down, and I'm a little scared at this point. And mind you, I've been in areas I've been in those kind of situations before. I get in my car and I start driving, and these cops are telling me go this way, that way. Again, that zombie-esque kind of feel, because they didn't even know what was going on. They're working on this like this. I can't even put it into words. It's just, and I started going down the street, and I see power lines. I see these houses just pop up fires everywhere, and I'm taking pictures at the same time. and trees on the ground, and I'm going around. I call my wife because now I'm scared. Now I have no idea where I am. GPS isn't working because the internet was down over there. This is in Altadena.
Mm-hmm.
And I called my wife and I just started crying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been maybe 3 times in my life since doing that, well, actually 2, I should say. 3, where I just started crying, and it brought me, like you said, right back to the LA riots. And it was even scarier because I didn't know where I was. I was not familiar with Altadena as much as I would with LA City, even though we're in the county. And the devastation and the change in the matter of minutes for people, it just brought me back to those days of the LA riots, seeing your town, you grow up in, just for whatever reason, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's political, it doesn't matter. It's natural, doesn't matter. None of that matters. It's just what you see and how you respond and react to it. This visceral way is just it was beyond intense for me, and that's why I ended up like tearing up on my, and trying to get out, trying to explain to my wife. I had no idea where I was. I was scared.
Yeah.
Well,
and for people listening, one, if you don't have a sense of direction, that's one thing. If you don't have a sense of direction and fire is all around you, that's the other. Now, when you talk about the riots, kind of the known threat at that time, it sounds like, was any human being with a pistol or firearm who could pop shots at you. As long as you didn't see human beings, you were good to go on the roadway.
Right.
But that idea of being lost and then being surrounded by fire and knowing
danger.
Yeah, and danger, knowing too that there's really not any help. It's too much. And I've talked to other firefighters and people who've lived out there, and it's like this idea of once it really took off, it's just this monster engulfing, structure after structure, and fire departments, getting depleted of water, or I should say fire hydrants getting depleted of water, supplies, I mean, everything. Now you're talking about your days early on and, kind of coupled with more recent, but you didn't stay in an ambulance field. You didn't stay in like a first responder field, but that's how you kind of started out, right? At a very young age.
Yeah, it's funny because I was a little, what you would call a rude boy, a little ska boy, from the ages I was 12, and we'll talk about how we ended up, meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I was 12. My best friend Danny and I had 2, William and Danny, and I remember meeting William. This kid, he had dreadlocks, or he had a flat top at that time, and he was sitting at the other end of the room, and he was dressed like me, just funky clothes. I still have these clothes, by the way. I'm 54 now, and I'm going to be 55 soon, but whatever. I still have the clothes from when I was 12.
Uh-huh.
It was the typical plaid shirts, suspenders, green pants, and we had these things called either creepers, which were these funky shoes, or monkey boots. And essentially what these were Doc Martens was around, but these were kind of like cooler looking Doc Martens in the sense, right? Mm-hmm. It had its own style and flavor. I would wear Stacey Adams shoes sometimes, but we had a specific West Coast look to us, even if it was Pendleton. I'm reading these books about, just going back in time, and we were wearing like Pendletons and brown khakis, and there's been times that we could gotten confused for and for being a gang, and I actually got arrested when I was 15 because cops thought I was in a gang with my friend, because the way we looked, and you don't think about that, but I'm part Latino, so my skin was a little darker when I was younger. Yeah, it was funny. Anyways, digress on that. But I was a little rude boy, a little ska boy, and ska at that time was, especially in the 80s, was a music that just had no. It was like everybody was invited to listen to it. every group was allowed to listen to it because it was derived from all these just different styles. So, ska originally started, in Jamaica, but it was, the predecessor to reggae. Even Bob Marley was in a ska band, but the ska in itself had come from like soca and jazz out of the U.S. and also soul out of the U.S. So it derived from all these different cultures and all this different kinds of music getting together and creating this really cool sound. And then jazz too, which was a huge influence in that. And if you liked all that kind of music to begin with, this was just a natural thing. And then you add like reggae to all that, and then you add, and then, eventually it turns into kind of like also punk and what have you. Hence the Bad Brains thing. It was a combo of two, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
It was all these things that were like all combined together. So I see William, we became fast friends. And then Danny was another one, and he listened to other music, but he turned me on to bands, and his brother and that. And so up until I was about 16 or 17, I was a total music nut, right? But that kind of music, the punk rock element and doing the joints, I guess, or whatever as a kid, and and all that stuff, and just being a kid, being a teenager, and growing up in LA, the whole skater thing, the whole surfer thing, that was real. That all happens, And by the time I hit 17, I decided I wanted to get into EMS, and I ended up getting a job at Santa Monica Hospital. I think I was like their youngest employee. And me being the smart ass I am, they actually put me on a floor to put me in the right direction over there. And that was the 4th stage oncology and the final stage AIDS. This was 1987. When you got AIDS, then you had about 6 months to live, and that was it. It was the death sentence, essentially, at that point. And 4th stage oncology, it wasn't like today where you could survive. I mean, it was also kind of the death sentence. So in this odd way, my smart ass comment, just about, not about any of that, it was just me being me, because I was interested in working in this hospital, and they were put us on different floors and what have you. I think that was the best thing that ever happened to me, was to put me on that floor, because I got an instant compassion and understanding of real life that I never got. And then, of course, I graduated working in the ER. I worked in surgery a few times, ICU. I was on the Code Blue team. But then on my 18th birthday, I decided and became like an explorer with LA City Fire, and did that for 4 years. And I decided I didn't really want to work on the fire engine. I wanted to work on the rescue ambulance. So I was out on the RAs, and we would do 24-hour shifts every time, but eventually then to the privates and that. But that's essentially how it kind of switched over. Now, to get to music, on my days off, I was answering phones at a radio station, and my friend had given me the CD of this band out of Long Beach, and I listened to the CD. This was 1994, and I'm already getting kind of burnt out from the ambulance stuff, and I ended up wanting to work with this band, and the band was called Sublime. And so for 2 years, I was working through Skunk Records with the band Sublime. And on my days off, I worked at a radio station called KLOS. And mind you, these were 24-hour shifts. On Tuesdays or Thursdays, I'd work with Sublime at the place. And the other Tuesday or Thursday didn't work. I was working auxiliary with LA County Coroner.
Oh, man.
Why? I don't know. But it's something I had to do.
Yeah. So when you were, I'm gonna get to the coroner stuff. That's where you and I also kind of cross paths too. But so when you were talking about working with Sublime and Skunk Records, what did that entail? Just like kind of setting up, helping?
Yeah, man, just like doing whatever. I was 24 at the time, so I'm way too old to be like a regular intern, even though I guess I would have been whatever you want to call an intern. Whatever they needed, I would go there. I would, if it was some, if it was a local tour stuff, help out, whatever at the thing. I'll call radio stations. Myrtle Beach, that's near you, right?
Yeah.
I would call them. Because this was
look, hold on. We don't down in the South, some people will be like, we'll claim Myrtle Beach, and other people will be like, oh, Myrtle Beach is terrible. It's hit or miss. If you're a kid, it's fun. If you're an adult, it's terrible.
I mean, you want to know the truth, man? I'm from LA. People are like, you don't know all these places. I'm like, not really. Everybody comes here anyway, so it doesn't really matter for me. Yeah. I'm set. You never live anywhere else? Nah, don't need to. Everybody will come here.
Yeah, you got everything out there anyway.
We
right?
got it here. Yeah.
Yeah.
We even changed our names of our stores to make them sound better, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You got Kroger, we got Ralph's. So.
Oh, so I've never heard of Ralph's, and Kroger is now like out of business in most places.
Not here. Yeah.
They charged way too much. I'm a very thrifty shopper.
Same. Well, that's just age. But. Yeah, man. Whatever they needed, and I remember advancing is a term in management where you're kind of like pushing a band's agenda that they're going to be if they're going on tour. You want to advance the tour, you get stuff set up for them, and okay. I was advancing. Let's say the band if they're for. They were already on the first Warped Tour. So this was a new thing. Warped Tour hadn't even existed at that point. Yeah. And they would have been on the first. And so, we're calling radio stations, calling places like record stores. And this is 94 or 95. Mm-hmm. And there was a thing called POP. And what POP is, here, I'll grab something here if I can find it. POP is point of purchase. And it's a term that's not really around anymore, but a POP... I don't have anything in front of me. A POP would be maybe a skateboard, or it would be some kind of gadget. Now here's like a little one. I mean, this is a USB, right? Okay. I've had this for, I don't know, at least 10 years, but it's a little USB. A POP would be something obviously a little bigger. And let's say it would say Sublime on it, or a skateboard. And the idea was you would give the skateboard to the record or to the radio station, or you would give it to, let's say, a record store, and the record store in turn would keep it put up on the wall, or sometimes they would give it away. Most of the times they would give it away. If you go to brick and mortar record stores today, a lot of times in the front, they'll have these things called flats. And what a flat is would be the name of the band, whatever is going on, new album. And there's usually a box that says free in the front. The cool record stores will do it for free, right? Yeah. The Dickie record stores would charge money for that in the front, even though they got it for free and they're making a buck out of it. The point of POP was like marketing. So I would, as a fan, I would come in, especially let's say like a super fan of any kind of genre of music or a band, and I see this. The idea is for me to get that free, so then I would come back to the record store, right? Like a good restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah. They would definitely give you a little free dessert or whatever it is, and then boom, you're back the next time, especially if it's your first time, right? So that's what record stores we'd send stuff out. I remember making the 40 ounce to Freedom, which was, their second album, the bottle. I would actually make the bottle. It was a King Cobra bottle.
Yeah.
We ripped the stickers off, and I put a Sublime sticker on the front, and then we would send those out as 40 ounce of Freedom bottles.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I miss about, and maybe it still goes on, but that's what I miss about bands that, I don't know, we're just creative in this idea of just pushing stuff out there and not just expecting that some big record label is gonna do all the work, because they never do, ever.
Well, they do in their way of doing it. It's not done as a grassroots thing. They're not equipped to doing that. The grassroots stuff is definitely the smaller labels, or labels that are run by bands in itself. They're called boutique labels essentially. And so Skunk Records was part of MCA, which then, was part of Universal anyway. So the bankroll is there, It's just you need a team in itself. So if, let's say, anybody watching that's like in a band itself, you need to set up your own team, and that's how that stuff happens. It's about the team. It's you can't rely on such and such label.
Yeah.
It's like your own thing. Another thing is, like, on the CDs, the early Sublime CDs, it says send in $1 for lyrics. And I remember and I asked, I said, do we have any lyrics? And they said, no. I said, well, we got all these dollars. And I remember this, the CD of Dead Kennedys, the Rotten Fruit Dead Kennedy CD was playing. I grabbed the artwork of the Dead Kennedys lyrics, and I Xeroxed them, and I sent back to all the people that sent the $1 Dead Kennedy lyrics, because on the Sublime CD itself, it said send $1 for lyrics. It never said what lyrics. And I figured, the most punk rock thing you could ever do, and I don't know if anybody got the joke, I thought it was funny, is to send back lyrics, especially the Dead Kennedys, which would have been lyrics in general. But
people are like confused, like, hang on a second.
I
don't think this is the same thing.
And I think that those dollars ended up going to the Thai restaurant that was down below. And here's another little funny thing. So a lot of the old bootlegs used to have addresses on it. And one of the addresses was actually the Thai restaurant down below, as they put out the bootlegs. So the bands are putting out the bootlegs of the bootlegs. So again, it was like one of those funny things, and it was all punk rock, and you just did it because it was funny, and it was against the system. Lo and behold, and I was with the system, so it's like
well, at least you sent people something for their $1. I mean,
you're not going to keep the $1. I mean, that wouldn't be right. It's just lyrics, Dead Kennedy lyrics. I don't know if I still have those. I do have one bottle of one unopened bottle of the beer, the 40-ounce beer.
Damn. Yeah, the only time I used to order a lot of stuff when I was a kid like that. I mean, like people listening, you've heard me talk about it, but that's how a lot of people were getting music and merchandise out. You'd have to order it through mail and trust that when you sent money to a band, they were going to send you whatever you ordered. And the only time I ever remember it not working, and it was Naked Reagan, and it's no slight to them, but I'd ordered a Naked Reagan shirt, and man, this was like 1991 maybe, or 90, somewhere around there. Yeah. But I was so excited, man. I loved them, and I didn't get it. I never got the shirt. So I wrote a follow-up letter and said, hey, on this date and time, I sent this money to order this shirt. And then the reply was like, oh, well, we mailed the shirt. And that was the first time I realized maybe the Postal Service did not deliver my package.
or went to a neighbor, and now
there's some kid down the street wearing a Naked Reagan shirt.
Well, that was the thing with like that kind of music, at that time. If you're looking from outside the window and you're looking at a bunch of kids meandering around, with mohawks or funky ass hair or funky clothes, you're going to have a natural prejudice towards them, thinking that they're just like troublemakers or whatever, especially if you're like a punk rock kid and, you're going to, you're some outcast. And in a sense you are an outcast, but it's not the outcast you would think it would be. The punkers were actually, they were the ones that were like taking care of you, right? Mm-hmm. They were the ones that would fight a system of some sort of injustice and not be the one that has to post it on the wall, right? As I was saying about even like slam dancing itself, if slam dancing, if you kind of break down the way the dance is, there is a hierarchy organization within it. And not a lot of people understand that if you're just watching. I'm sure today, like the kids, they're just stupid and they'll run into each other and hit each other. That's not what it was about.
Yeah.
But if you see the motion of like the slam dance just go in circles, and it wasn't about hurting people. You know, it was shoved. It was the angst. It was the aggression. It was whatever it was, and you're getting that kind of stuff out. If you fall down, everybody should pick you up, right? Immediately, and then you keep going on. And if you see a solo guy, and it was called in Scott terms a skinhead moonstomp, and it's not, you know, neo-Nazi skinheads. These are, you know, guys that shave their head. There was a duality, especially shows out here. You'd actually have the two kinds in one venue, and there would be no fisticuffs. It was just, you know, let us do our thing, and that was it. Outside is another story. But within the venue or the pit or whatever, you know, everybody was all completely inclusive in that. So point is, you see a guy doing this in a pit, and that means he's one of those original dudes, right? Back up. Everybody back up, let him do his thing. I mean, the guy's probably like this big anyways, but
yeah,
you know, let him do his thing, and that's part of that hierarchy. That's the big peacock kind of feather thing, you know, is he's putting out. You gotta let him do his thing. You don't run into him at all. No, you know, because he's old school punker, right? Once he stops, and then maybe he'll then start going into it, and then you kind of like follow into it. But if he's doing like a slow thing, you know, he's setting rule in there, and then he'll start going around, and then everybody goes around. But it was never about like hitting folks or bouncing into folks, because if you purposely hit folks, they kind of took care of you in a little bit, you know. It was Lord of the Flies in that aspect, you know. You'll get I remember hitting somebody in the kidneys that hurt my friend, so I walked off. So that was that, you know. I mean,
it's a great, like, if people get into like just symbolism and interpretation, and it's like micro versus macro, that's what it is. Like you're talking about in the pit, and people have talked about it for years. When someone falls, you pick them up. The same thing in that community, especially for us in the South, there was always like just small enclaves of like skater punks, and you would pick up somebody here and there, like physically, going to like a gas station or something. You see some kid skating, and then you're like, oh man, dude, you're skating the, you know, John Lucero or whatever, Schmidt stick or something. And you get to talking, and the next thing you know, now that kid's skating with you, you know. And it was like this idea of like picking people up, like grabbing on to people and bringing them into your circle. And that's what I always loved about it. I know, you know, in the last, I don't know, 10 years, whatever, people that listen to the show and they're not part of that history, they'll send me clips and be like, oh, is this what you're talking about? You know, unity and people being cool to one another. And it's like a hardcore band playing, and people doing like spin kicks and punching people in the face. And I'm like, nah, you know, every generation is different. That was never the thing, because that's going to be misinterpreted. And fights are going to break out. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about stage dives, you know, pits. And that idea of the kid on the outskirts, and your crew finds them or meets them. And then you're like, hey, you know, come hang out with us. And usually if you can get 2 or 3 or 5, or, I mean, at one point we were probably 10 or 12 of us all hanging out and skating and listening to music, and then going to shows. And so I was fortunate as a young kid. I hung out with my older brother and all his friends. And so I got to go to shows at a very early age and get accepted into this whole subculture that shaped me for the rest of my life. I mean, here I am as a grown man, recently retired, and I still listen to music, and I still want to be an ambassador for that, and people to understand that. You mentioned Dead Kennedys earlier, or Sublime, or anybody. You can put that music on now, and it's still relevant, and still good. Like, it doesn't like go out of style or trend or whatever. It's incredible.
Well, not only that, but you as an individual, I still wear skater pants and I still wear Converse.
I've worn Vans since I was like 10 years old.
Yeah. You know, and you don't leave. There was some, you can say that about any era. I guess. But there is something about, that world. Look, I'm working on the ambulance, doing, God, whatever, or, during that time, and, the toll it was taking, especially, in first responding, taking on my psyche. And I started doing the Tuesday at Skunk Records. I'm out at shows in the pit, and I was like 25, 24, 25, 26 at the time. Little older than you would think, but man, that was like a lifesaver for me, because, I'm dealing with some heavy shit on the left. And then I go to, the left, being not politically, but just my job. And then, you tilt over to the personal life over here, and you're just wild. You're just letting loose, and it helps, and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny, because I want to kind of explain how, we kind of met, and just in a funny way, and why I'm wearing this Bad Brain shirt.
Yeah.
So the author, James Patterson, I never really read a lot of his books before, but I've been reading a lot lately of police, ambulance, firefighters, books, like true fiction books, nonfiction books. And it's just been kind of a recent thing, and we talk about some of the stuff that, we kind of like went through years and years ago, and how it kind of affects you, at that time. And, some of the stories I'm kind of like reliving in my head, even though it's been like 30 years. And I know for me, especially if you learn how to compartmentalize a lot of stuff that, we go through, that I'm reading these stories as a cathartic way for me to get an understanding of what it is. Why this late? Why is it popping up in my head? I don't know. I've thought about writing myself. I wrote that article. I thought about doing like this kind of stuff myself, because you just, as you age, you have different chapters in your life, and you create new things in your life. And so I'm reading all these books. I'm rereading books that I haven't read in like 20 years. And this James Patterson book was called Walk the Blue Line, and it's essentially vignette stories. And it's very similar to a guy named Mark Baker, who wrote this book called Cops, and also he wrote a book called Nom that was back in the 80s, and they never got reprinted. And they were all vignette stories. And what a vignette story is, it's just these little tiny stories of experiences, right? So it has the name, and you experience these essentially 5-minute stories, and in your head you visualize all this kind of stuff. And so I've been reading all these different stories, and it's funny enough, because a lot of the stories I'm reading coincidentally all take place and around the same time I did everything. So in that cathartic way I was mentioning, it's actually helping me understand what everybody goes through. Right. And what they have gone through, because it's reliving, even though some of it may be 30 years old, doesn't matter. And so I'm reading, and then I just see your name. I don't know if it was your name and initials, or I forget what it was, but
yeah, it was 2 initials and then Sanders. So it's like BC Sanders. Yeah.
BC Sanders. And within the first line, you start talking about Bad Brains, right? And then you start talking about Minor Threat. And I'm in bed. I got my little blue light on. I got the smellies going, and the thunderstorm on the thing. I mean, I got like a whole spa going on before I go to bed. My wife's in the room in that, but it helps me conk out. And I'm reading, and I see this Bad Brains thing. I'm like, wait a second. A cop likes Bad Brains? That's not right. Right? That don't seem right to me. That seems weird. But from back, and I'm reading more, and then I started reading about, this guy. I don't even know who he is, and with the funny initial name, and then talking about his childhood. I said, wait, he's a cop. Why is he talking about growing up as like a troublemaker and all this, and being a punk rocker? And I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And so it may have been another band's name. And at that point, I stopped. I picked up my phone and I searched your name, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm
Mhm.
like, who is this guy? And I found it. And then I quickly went to IG, and that's where I just immediately followed you. And then that morning, you had followed me back, and I guess you saw, this was a kismet type moment. You saw
Yeah.
first responder, punk rocker,
Mhm.
blah, 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 the whole nine with me on it. And we just got to talking. And you know, the reason I'm wearing this Bad Brains is because it was the first thing that you had mentioned, and two, this band has actually influenced so many bands in general, because they're from DC, your neck of woods.
Mhm.
They were a punk reggae band, and the influence of so many other bands, and
Yeah.
the intensity of what they were. And at that time, there was no other music that was really like this. Later down the road, bands like Fishbone and all that, who I know, and then uh you know the ska stuff from the Specials and all this. But that was just the tip off, because I thought, wow, and he likes this.
Yeah.
And then I started reading the rest of your stories, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm understanding what he's saying, because I understand it because I was there, in a sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. I might not have carried a badge and a gun, but I had a flashlight and a helmet. But it didn't matter, because being on the streets, and going to situations, that's my favorite line in NYPD Blue. Everything's a situation.
Mhm.
And it's not about crime, it's not about fires, it's not about this and that. It's knocking on someone's door who's having the worst day of their life,
Yeah.
and you do that 20 times a day, and boy, man, it's intense.
Yeah, and so many people, I'll come back to when that first they were messaging, but so many people don't fully grasp what um first responders, nurses, school teachers, like what they're experiencing, absorbing other people's um trauma, emotions, knowing behind the scenes when a kid leaves a school and goes home to an abusive family, or being a patrol officer and going to that family's, calls after, you know, domestic violence, or you worked in the coroner's office, or you saw death the way most people do not see it. Sadly, nowadays, most people see death through Instagram or through TikTok videos, and it's like faces of death now on everybody's handheld devices. And it becomes a little surreal for them. Not that, hey, this goes on daily. And when people see it, they either deal with it at the time or they compartmentalize it. But at some point, the human brain's only going to absorb so much of that. And we're currently seeing a big trend in first responders, mental health, and people addressing post-traumatic stress and how the body deals with that. Now, I was fortunate in my department. We had a psychologist. Her whole job was to service employees for our department. So we didn't have to go through a third party or anything like that. And if you called her or sent her a text or whatever, she would make arrangements to talk to you. I mean, she dealt with people with phobias. She dealt with people who had seen death or were dealing with special victims unit, and patrol officers who were, pulling up on crash scenes, or pulling up and somebody's telling them their last words before they code out or before they die because they're bleeding out from gunshot wounds. And so a lot of people don't fully understand that. And so there's this big shift that's going on now that I'm really thankful for, because for decades, how a lot of people dealt with that was just sadly, through a lot of alcohol use and becoming withdrawn and avoiding crowds and avoiding, future conflicts and things. So on their days off, sometimes they just wanted to decompress, or like you were saying, you go see a show, you get in the pit, and all of this energy that's positive, and it kind of filters out, and it gets out some of that anxiety and some of that I guess worry, because the more we see, the more we know is right around the corner. And I think you and I both probably agree on that after you see enough death and you understand that it can become a household accident that kills someone. It can be a car crash. It can be bullets or blades or blunt objects. It's tough, and it does play a toll. And I think people need to fully understand that you've got to address it. And so when that book came out, that Walk the Blue Line, I tell a lot of people about it because when that project first started, there was a lot of police bashing going on in the media and across the country. And I grew up, in when I say grew up, like in law enforcement, like my whole career was, working the roughest parts of the city, working gangs, doing that stuff. I was used to going into areas and being cussed out and people hating the police and stuff. So it wasn't as big of an eye opener for me, but for a lot of officers, they kind of felt betrayed, even when, media outlets were bashing them. So when James Patterson and Matt Eversmann, the co-author on that, and Matt's the one that did my interview, when they started that project, it was all about giving back. And,
Right.
and at that time I thought, man, this is really cool. Like, I was really proud to be part of that. And so Matt and I did, I don't know, about an hour and a half interview. And then they compiled that into that section. So it reads as if I'm writing it, but I'm not writing it. It's based on these interviews. And then there's another section in there from a buddy of mine. He's on Instagram, Nako Nolan. He's an LA cop, grew up the same way, punk, hardcore. And his section talks about horrendous murder and a guy walking around the streets of LA with a head hanging over his shoulder. It was just crazy, absolutely crazy. And I know I went off on a tangent, but that's one of those things that I think that book, if people want a really good perspective, to read it, because it's, it's sections of people's lives across the country in police work. And I'm quite sure other books or other projects are probably going on like that for fire, EMS, nursing.
You'd think they were, but they're actually not.
Okay.
I scoured, and I think because James did just a good job at it. There's one thing, you mentioned before about folks are seeing this on socials. Mm-hmm. And they're becoming numb to that world, mm-hmm. right? Coming numb to, the other part of life that we don't want to, necessarily be part of. There's one thing that's missing, and you could understand this. And I think this is where it affects us. We're doing what we did a lot more because you're not attributing our other senses that we do. Okay. Yeah. Is there a smell? Sure. Is it a copper smell? Let's say if you go to something where there's blood, there's a heavy duty an iron smell that goes on. You worked in homicide, and you go to a homicide, even though people are screaming, there's also at that same time there's a non-existent sound that also happens. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? There's there's this odd silence in the air, as if something happened, and you could sense something happened here, and there's that silence, and it's just an odd feeling. I mean, like I said, there could be screaming, but you feel a silence that has also happened, mixed with that smell of cordite or iron or whatever it is. That really gets into your head too, because now and especially during the corners, and then you actually have to touch somebody. Yeah. And pick them up. A lot of people don't know that fire and cops at when someone ceased to exist, are not allowed to touch anything. initially maybe to do life-saving procedures, but after the fact, if it's not, you cannot touch anybody. That's the coroners. And doing some of that actual physical movement of somebody and seeing that 1,000-yard stare of dead eyes as you're moving it, looking at you, it's a whole other it's a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
And that's I know for a fact that's where music was definitely my gin of choice, I guess you would say. Because I did have partners that drank and ended up doing drugs, and, what have you. And it does affect. I remember during the time I was extremely angry. And we didn't have all that. You had to learn to compartmentalize your anger, and good thing for music, because that helped me so much. And that's when I decided that after a decade of everything, I had it, and I attribute it to actually the band Sublime for changing my life. And I started working in music and TV, and then eventually been on the radio for 27 years or 28, whatever it is. And that's just next chapter, like you.
Yeah. So that's a great topic there. You've been on the radio as a DJ, right?
Yeah.
For at least 27, 28 years.
1998. And actually, this is funny. This is my first playlist. I didn't just bring it out for this. I found it. Yeah, and so here it is.
What are some of the songs?
Oh God. 1998. Black Eyed Peas. Clap Your Hands.
Okay.
Propeller Heads. Doing Time by Sublime, which is funny. Ben Harper. Band Spearhead. Bob Marley. Beastie Boys. This was Intergalactic when that just came out. Soul Coughing. Morphine. Pigeon Head. What else? The Pixies. Violent Femmes. Fishbone. Ted Hawkins. Lionel Hampton is a jazz thing. Primus. This was my very first show. I got a call saying, "Hey, you're on." I wasn't even prepared. I just grabbed a bunch of CDs at that time and carried them over, and didn't even know if they're bad words or whatever. And I threw everything I had.
So you got to actually pick the music you were putting on the radio.
Yeah. So the station I'm at, it's called KCRW. It's in Los Angeles. We're a public radio station, but we're also known as a tastemaker station around the world. And what a tastemaker station is, it's a station that helps set the tone, brings out like bands that have never been heard before, and thus becoming commercial viable bands and whatever. So some of the biggest bands in the world, would stop by a station like ours or get introduced to the world via radio, at our station, or like a station like BBC Radio 1 out of the UK. What is it? Out of Triple J out of Australia, KCRW and KXEP or KXEP in Washington State, and then KCRW in Los Angeles. So.
Now you've also been in some movies, right?
Well, so again, growing up here, it's kind of a normality. So I started doing that when I was like 7. I'm actually in an Incubus video.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing in that video?
Running naked through downtown LA with my roommate and also my friend who directed it. My friend who directed it was also an actor, and he was a big fan of Incubus at the time. They were a new band. And so, yeah, they had us run through the 2nd Street Tunnel naked. So there you go. True story. Yeah. And what else? I'm in another movie playing me. I'm in the Billie Eilish documentary playing me. And I'm in Elton John's latest documentary playing a Dodger announcer.
Okay.
And the first movie playing me in was when I was working on the ambulance. I'm in Falling Down, and I'm at the very final, one of the final scenes. Joel Schumacher, the director, saw me and my partner and pointed to us and say, "You guys are in." Didn't really like ask us. They just like, "You're in." I'm like, all right. And it was Robert Duvall and Robert Duvall's nephew, who was playing another paramedic. He pointed to me and my partner Kelsey and said, "Okay, you guys are in." So then we became like 3 paramedics rather than 1. And we're in identical uniforms, which was funny enough because I had black pants, white shirt, you know, a little thing. And yeah, and so we got in the movie, did about 10 takes, back to one, you know. And so we're in Falling Down, which is such a classic LA movie. So
yeah, I can remember seeing it when it first came out, and not being able to fully relate because I was, you know, a younger guy. But then as you get older, you're kind of like, I could see somebody just snapping like that. I mean,
yeah.
Especially coming from his background. But what did that feel like? Like when they were just like, "Hey, get in there." Were you like, "Oh, okay, cool"? Or were you just like, "Whatever"?
I mean, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, look, when you grow up here, it's kind of like this is our export. You know, entertainment's our export. Everybody that I knew growing up, it didn't matter what everybody just tried to get that shot. You know, when you grow up here, you end up. It's funny because I've been in more things than people who come here to be in stuff. And I ended up like leaving after like I wasn't like the first McRib McDonald's commercial or something, and then I remember I'm like, I'm tired of this. I don't even want to do it anymore. You know.
Yeah.
No. I auditioned for Taxi. That was the last thing I did when I was a kid.
For the TV show?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't make the cut, but had to do it in front of Danny DeVito.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, was he kind of nice, or was he just like?
Of course, everybody's nice.
Well, I mean, you say that. I assume everybody's nice until they're not, but you never know.
Look, if you're like a celebrity and everybody comes up to you every second of every minute and they want something, and it's not like they want something except they want something from you. You know, they want a picture, they want an autograph. It gets a little much, you know. So
yeah. Oh, I could see that. I love talking to people. I'm a huge extrovert, but it would be weird, I would think, just when you want to relax and then people coming up, "Hey, let me get a picture, sign my napkin."
You know, it's come on, give it a little, you know. How about just a simple, "Hey, you know what, Mr. DeVito, thank you. Thank you for hours on end. I don't want anything. I just want to thank you for you did a job well done and it made me feel good. You know, and I thank you for that." Yeah. That's it, man. It's just saying thank you rather than wanting a picture or all that. I mean, who's the picture for? Just so you could post it in these days and show all your friends who you met. Yeah. You know, the person has no idea who you are. I mean, it's just, you know. Yeah. Silly.
Now, who was like one of the nicer either musicians or celebrities or whatever that you've met that you were kind of like, all right, that was
get into that, but because that just puts people in the. To this day, I've never met. I don't think I've ever met a mean celebrity or musician.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, how about this? How about someone you would want to meet that you haven't met yet? And I mean meet, like get to have a conversation with, not just a, "Hey, how you doing?"
Celebrity or?
It could be anybody, really.
I don't know. I love newscasters for some odd reason. You know, and I love meeting newscasters. I don't know. I mean, book authors, newscasters, maybe a jazz musician. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I feel like, you know, doing what I do now, and it's just, I don't know. They're just normal folk to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I don't have anybody off the top of my head either, but I'm not like in that world. Like where I am is pretty like normal. It's like a normal city. You know, my wife and I walk about 6 miles every evening, and we go down to the river, we come back. And I mean, we'll meet people and talk to complete strangers. She's just like I am. So it makes life great because my whole life I've been that way. And she's been that way too. And legit, and I've told this story before, but we were out walking sometime last year, and this dude's doing yard work, and we just strike up a conversation. I think inside of about 6.5 minutes, he was an older guy in his late 60s. He's telling us how he used to traffic cocaine in the 80s and how he got busted. He's just the funniest guy to talk to. And
right,
so
but
then,
that to me is better.
oh yeah, that's what I'll say. Like,
That's an interesting story.
Yeah, I love like real characters like that. And I grew up around people like that from my mom and dad and their friends. And so it's great when, you know, she and I are out and we're talking to people and we meet these characters. And like that dude, everything he's saying, if you heard the story, people will be like, that's BS. But the best part about it is he gets to the end of one of the big stories. He's like laughing and he's going, I mean, you can Google it. You can read it now. Like, it's documented. And we did later, and we were like, damn, he's exactly right. But either way, like just stuff like that. I really enjoy talking to people, meeting people. And doing a podcast, like that's the best part about it, is just like you and I met. I mean, we met just by chance, but it was you reading the book and me having a podcast, but we had this Instagram, this social media entity thing that people can reach out and talk to one another. I always push it like that's the positive side of it. That's the way that should be used.
That's social media. That's how I've met a lot of folks through that. You know, granted, doing what I do, it could be a lot easier. And granted, you doing what you do, it's a lot easier. But it doesn't mean that other people can't do that. I mean, of course, this is the world of media now that we're doing it in. But yeah, I mean, you just got to use it right. It can't always be as toxic as it is these days, you know. And, you know, I try to limit. I don't even go on social media except to communicate. And that's it. I don't rarely do I ever scroll or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If I'm looking for music, maybe that would be the only thing. If I'm looking for other photographers or want to get ideas that other photographers are doing, and you know, there are photographers. Some of my you asked me like who I want to meet. If I want to meet them, I will meet them in a sense, because you know, we got the one life thing going on that we know about, and you know, just make the best of it, have fun. And I never expected to be on the radio for 27 years. You know, I never expected to do all this stuff. But I had, and I think that goes back to doing the EMS stuff. I never thought I was going to be doing that, you know? Yeah. But you know, I'm all about kind of a philosophy of I call it tilting. And if you're doing something and if it's not working, tilt your perspective, just turn your head just a little bit and tilt your perspective. And all of a sudden something new could pop up in front of you. I never thought I would teach. I ended up teaching. I never thought I'd, you know, be a photographer, and I started taking photos and stuff. So you know, you could put your mind to it. And the thing is, I come from a super duper blue collar family. And I was an adopted kid. So I always felt like I was never part of anything to begin with, because that's part of the adoption thing that you kind of think about. But you know, an airplane mechanic and a teacher, I mean, that's that's as blue as you could get. And
that sets the groundwork for you. You know what I mean? Like I was the same way. Like I was blue collar, whatever you want to call it. Like that's all I knew were people from the trades.
Yeah.
And there was not a big emphasis on college because people could make money other ways and they were fine. They paid their bills and they were great people. That was my thing. My mom always did. And she did say, you know, if you go to college, like do it that way, it opens the doors for other, you know, like supervisory positions and stuff like that. And whatever field you get into, but there was never, this pressure that if you don't go to college, you're going to be a loser or something. Not from my family. That came from school teachers and stuff, and people who I thought were not hitting on a whole lot back then. But so you talked about photography too. Before we wrap up, what all do you do now with photography? Because I've seen some of your examples, but what all do you do with it?
I've done a few album artworks. I'll shoot promo stuff. I'm just, you know, I did it for a complete hobby, and you know, I'll see my stuff I'll see it online all the time. Especially like, you know, I've seen it in Spotify, I've seen it in album artwork, I've done campaigns, little film campaigns, whatever it is. It's just a hobby I just love doing. You know, and then if it's going back to the EMS stuff where I'm, you know, with a scanner and chasing that kind of stuff, I love doing that, but putting an artistic tinge to that world. I mean, eventually I would love to get into more film stuff. And, you know, to me, it's just, if you just set your mind to doing stuff and want to do stuff, you could do it. And you don't need an expensive camera to do anything. I mean, people shoot whole things on their iPhones if you're doing film.
Yeah.
And if not, you know, the Dollar Tree or whatever, sometimes they have I used to go to Dollar Tree or 99-cent store out here and buy expired film and just the cheapest camera, because I realize it's not necessarily, you don't have to worry about what the camera is and how nice it is. It's all about the composition of the picture, right? And if you're shooting those kind of things in that kind of odd way anyways, and if it looks like it's broken, so what? That's your style. You know, you create it as your style. You don't need to worry about it being a perfect picture and all that, because who cares at the end of the day? You know, if you like it, that's all that matters.
Hey, look, what put you on the spot. Have you got one or two or three bands that like newer music that people should check out?
Yeah. So yeah, you know, funny enough, let me try to think of so there's an artist that I absolutely really dig. He born in San Francisco but moved to India. His name is Sid Sriram. It's Sriram is his last name. And he did this album called Siddharth a few years back that in my mind, I mean, the beauty of you know, because he is of Indian descent, the sounds that he has and the way he has structured songs and using a lot of the tonal stuff, the classical work out of India with his voice, with kind of modern day, almost drum and bass and hip hop that was put into his album, you know, absolutely blows me away. He's on Tiny Desk too, on NPR's Tiny Desk.
Okay.
And I'll send you a link, but when you listen to his stuff, he just recently put out this really cool song, which came from a 13th century poet. And the video that's attached to it is very reminiscent of this movie that came out called Baraka, which was just all music and sound design with just footage, no dialogue whatsoever. And when listening to this song, you know, I look at Sid's stuff as just this other level of understanding of music and putting it out there. For more of the contemporary stuff, and then Sid is as contemporary as it would be. You know, I'm trying to think of. Man, Who else? It's really hard for me.
Yeah. Do you find this, like, when someone asks you that, you start to think, well, I got to think about a specific person and what their musical tastes are before I just throw out a random musician or band?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because you know, my job in broadcasting is not to worry about necessarily what you listen to. It's to educate and give you an introduction and stuff that may be out there. If you're thinking of, you know, I'm listening to like a new artist that's named House of Protection, which is some of the guys from a band called Fever 333. And this is kind of tinging towards more of that metal sound that's happening. But if you kind of mix the older band Prodigy, which was an electro band in the late 90s, with this more metal stuff, you'll kind of hear that energy that's going on. I mean, you're going to hear more rock and metal that's going to start popping out. I mean, it's what is it, 2025 in April? April. And you're gonna definitely hear a giant change. Sound. You know, and what I mean by sound is in the mainstream, the contemporary mainstream. You have a lot of crossover music, right? There's always going to be this music here. There's always going to be this music here, and so on and so forth. They're always going to have your genres. When it hits the mainstream, that's when they have not genre specific. Pop is always kind of like taken other genres and kind of combine them into its own like thing, right? And so you're going to probably hear more of that guitar angst sound once again. That punk, that heavy metal, that rock sound is definitely going to come back as more of an entity than anything, I think, in this coming day.
Good. I think people need more of it. Well, look,
yeah. I mean, as far as all the other stuff, you know, I don't really say like my favorites are all this and that, because I take every artist like a painting, you know. It could be a white canvas with a red dot in the middle, or it could be a Basquiat, or it could be a Koons, Dean Koontz painting or artwork. Everybody, you know, it goes back to everything's a situation. So everybody's artwork is completely different, and I enjoy it for what it is from that individual. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that's a perfect way to wrap up, Jason. Dude, I appreciate you making time for us today. I got a lot more stuff I want to talk about offline here, but man, I appreciate your time, buddy.
Dude, thank you so much, man. And for all the kids, all the youngsters, with the broccoli hair, yeah, reach out to folks, man. You never know, man.
Yeah. You're right, 100%. All right, buddy. Take care, man.
All right, see ya. Thanks again.
Yes, sir.